Hello everyone, my name is Rosin, and welcome to episode 2 of Talkin Tabletop, the series where I put some random video game RPG gameplay up on the screen for you to look at while I talk about my experiences and opinions on tabletop role-playing games as a medium, and just my experiences with that scene overall. So, what you're looking at here is actually some Dark Souls remastered footage that I've recently recorded. And part of the reason I'm going through Dark Souls is, one, Elden Ring is really on the horizon. I think we only got like 2 more weeks of wait on that, and I'm very excited to play that game. Frankly, haven't really been keeping up with the pre-release stuff all that much, just because I know it's going to be good, and I'm not really chomping at the bit for more info on it. I just kind of want it to wash over me, and I hope it's a masterpiece, just like my mind was blown back in the early 2010s when I picked up Dark Souls when that came out, so very excited. But other than that, part of the reason I'm talking about it more specifically on this series is because recently it was announced that the people that have the rights to make the official Dark Souls tabletop role-playing game, Steamforged Games, they announced a while back that they had, the rights for Dark Souls and all that, and everyone's like, ooh, cool, Dark Souls tabletop role-playing game, that's cool. And then what ended up happening is it was announced, I want to say, like 2 weeks back or so, that the game is going to be using 5e, Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I guess I should clarify for people less familiar with tabletop games that are watching this. They're going to be using D&D 5e as the base rule set to base their system off of, which was met by a lot of disappointment by people in the tabletop role-playing game community and a lot of Dark Souls fans, me included. I was not happy with this news, like many others, and I decided, screw it, I'm going to record this video, and I'm just going to rant, basically, about why I think this is a horrible idea, and I basically recorded 30 minutes of me whining about how I thought this was stupid. And I really don't think that Dark Souls and D&D 5e have anything in common other than, I guess you beat up skeletons with the sword, maybe, if you want to be generous. There's magic, there's dragons, they're very surface level, they're both fantasy, but other than that, there are so many differences in how these games portray their worlds and portray violence, and It did not make any sense to me, and it was just 30 minutes of me going off on that. And to be honest, in general, I don't really know if I buy into the idea of making Dark Souls into a tabletop role-playing game to begin with. I feel like that's a lot harder than a lot of people probably want to give it credit for. I think Dark Souls is a experience that is very tailor-made to the medium of video games, and to translate that to something else, you'd have to make a lot of changes that you'd have to think very carefully about. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it'd be very hard, and I think if you're basically saying you're just going to take D&D 5e as the core rule set, I don't think you're thinking hard enough. I think that's kind of a lazy cash grab, to put it bluntly. I recorded a video that was just 30 minutes of me going off like that. And then I had some time away from the video before I decided to render it or have it go up or anything. The reason for that being, sadly, I had a family member recently had a stroke and pass away, and obviously I took a break from YouTube and, all of my online stuff just to, go through the grieving process and be with that person in their final moments. And, don't worry about me. I'm fine. And I'm even sorry, and I'd feel awkward bringing that up in the context of me talking about silly things like fantasy role-playing games. But I really only brought it up just to say that, I had some time away from the initial video that I had recorded. And when I went back to it a few days ago and listened to it, and I wasn't entirely happy with it. And, I thought, why don't I just retool this? I'm going to re-record my commentary and just instead talk about not just the Dark Souls tabletop role-playing game, but more so in general, talk about something that I kind of wanted to use this series to talk about at some point, which is the stranglehold that Wizards of the Coast and, in general, D&D has on the tabletop role-playing game medium, and how why so many people are frustrated with it, especially in kind of the side of the tabletop role-playing game community that I hang out in. Because, I see a lot of well-meaning, I assume well-meaning people who see people who get frustrated about the immense popularity and mainstream attention of particularly D&D 5e, and they don't get it, and they think it's a gatekeepy, elitist thing. And in most cases, that's not my experience. I really genuinely think that it's more of the fact that it sucks out the air of like so many other things to the point that I feel like it's actually very damaging to the hobby and the medium in general. And it is personally hard for me to think of another medium that has as much of a monopoly problem. Not even necessarily in terms of business, but that too, but just in terms of overwhelming adherence or reverence for one particular piece of creative output than tabletop role-playing games and D&D. It's bad. The only other thing I can really think of right now is think of the kind of the hold that Disney has on the film industry right now. But even then, like, movies don't have the problem where when you say you're going to a movie, someone's like, oh, what MCU movie are you seeing? Like, but when you tell someone like, oh yeah, I play tabletop role-playing games or whatever, so many people treat tabletop role-playing games, they'll just talk about it like, oh yeah, I play D&D, when what they really mean is I play tabletop role-playing games. Like, it's all-encompassing at this point. It's the language around the way we talk about tabletop role-playing games. So many people just use D&D as a catch-all, and I find that kind of depressing, because D&D is just one of many, many different ways you can interface with this hobby. And I really don't want this to be something where I just complain about all the problems I have with D&D personally, because I have quite a few. And in general, that's not, I'm a fan of a lot of niche type things, in terms of like video games or even movies or, anime and all that stuff or whatever. And I never want to be the guy that's like, oh, this popular thing is bad and you need to, like, check out this cool thing I like instead that's more underground. Like, I don't want to be that person ever. I would much rather communicate why I like the things I like and why they're worth your time, in addition to the big popular stuff that you might like, rather than saying, like, you should like this instead. That being said, I do feel like we do have a problem in this space, too, where people just... It feels like there's a lot of people that really don't want to try new experiences or don't want to try new things. And I kind of get that maybe tabletop role-playing games have a few barriers to entry that make that a little harder. Like, you do got to read the rules for new stuff and try it out. But frankly speaking, I genuinely feel like D&D is not the most accessible way to get into tabletop role-playing games by any means. The only thing it really has over anything else is that because it's so popular, you have so many different, like, online resources, or even, like, probably people that you could just ask in person. But in terms of, like, actually learning a rule system, there are so many indie games that do such a phenomenal job of teaching you not only just how to play them as a system, but frankly, in a lot of ways, I think make you a better player or GM. I think a lot about Blades in the Dark, even stuff like Dungeon World, which I don't really play Dungeon World anymore after Adam Koebel turned out to be a creep. But, a lot of these games have very, very good ways of kind of highlighting good habits and good ways to GM or run a game, or good ways to play a character, and kind of encourage you to get into those habits, whereas I feel like D&D in a lot of ways actually encourages a lot of bad habits in people, and doesn't incentivize play at the best and most, I guess, accommodating level as it probably could, compared to a lot of games where I feel like the social aspect is maybe a little bit more thought about, and actually integrated into them as rule systems. I think a lot about story gaming in particular, and how much care is put into that space and the games that come out of that space, to how to collaboratively roleplay. I can't speak today. Collaboratively roleplay and collaboratively tell a story that everyone at the table is comfortable with and everyone at the table is happy with, and that sort of thing. And in general, too, going back to people just being reluctant to try things, God knows how many times I've been frustrated because I've read an article that's like, oh, here's how to do a D&D, here's how to run like a D&D campaign that's like a horror movie. And so many different times I've thought about it, and I'm like, why don't you play, like, there are so many wonderfully made games out there that are explicitly about trying to make a game where horror is a core tone that it's going for and has the mechanics that are built from the ground up to give you that experience. And I just don't understand people's lack of desire to try that out, you know? Like, I get wanting to maybe switch things up every now and again and have that blend of genres, but I feel like there's a lot of people that get frustrated with D&D, and then when you kind of prod them and like, well, why don't you try this system or that system that maybe will appeal to what you're looking for more, a lot of people are just reluctant to do so, and I feel like that's just a shame. You know, I guess going back to the MCU example, or like Disney example that I gave earlier, it would be like someone being mad that the MCU movies aren't enough like spy films or something, like, you know, like the Captain America stuff or whatever. And then when you actually recommend, like, oh, hey, you should watch like Mission Impossible or like James Bond or whatever, they're like, I don't want to, you know, I just want to stick to what I'm comfortable with. And it's like, well, you know, you're not going to get what you're looking for then. You know, these are movies that are kind of made more with that in mind rather than having to stay with the core conceit of being a superhero thing, you know? And that just kind of baffles me as a person who, I guess, I don't know, I've just always been really willing to try out new things and experiences and stuff, I guess, in a way. And I just kind of wish that more people had that spirit in them a little bit, especially in the tabletop scene. Like, I remember, too, a little while back, kind of when I got into my current wave of tabletop role-playing game stuff, I think I talked about this a little bit in the last episode. It was because one of my friends was like, hey, I think it'd actually be kind of cool if we did like a mecha tabletop role-playing game thing or whatever. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, like, I've always literally wanted to do this. Let me figure out a system that's good for that. And I did my research, and I found that Beam Saber seemed like the perfect thing for what I wanted to do with the story and like the setting that I wanted to make. And it also seemed like something that would be very appealing to my set of players who wanted something that was maybe a little more like dramatic and focused on like tension of the story rather than a lot of like, you know, really detailed like mecha part customization and all that kind of crunchier stuff. So I was like, yeah, Beam Saber seems perfect. But while I was doing my research, one of the things I did find was that someone had gone through the work to make a Gundam role-playing game that was entirely based off of the 5th edition rule set, and I was just baffled by that idea, because at that point it's like, I feel like your time would actually just be better spent making a wholly unique system, rather than just try to, like, put this square peg in this triangular hole. You know, I do have a lot of criticisms of D&D, and I feel like it is a very flawed system, 5e in particular, in a lot of ways. That being said, I do feel like I'm on the verge of getting into an OSR kick. I recently downloaded Worlds Without Number and Old School Essentials, and I'm actually liking those a lot, but even then, I feel like that is more because of the additional work that was done for, I guess, Worlds Without Number in particular, more so than the fact that they're based off of old D&D editions. But I do think that, I don't know, there's just a lot of stuff about D&D that rubs me the wrong way. The one thing in particular that they've definitely been trying to get away from is the rather fraught way that race is handled. And even aside from playable races and the implications that having mechanical bonuses attached to your race and all that kind of has with it, just the fact that so many of the monsters and stuff are kind of essentially made to be these sentient people that are other and clearly marked as inherently evil and okay to kill and stuff like that, whereas, you know, a lot of that is caught up in old Tolkien-esque ideas of fantasy that were also fairly problematic in their old way and have unfortunately been something that the entire genre of fantasy has had to grapple with. But, you know, I do feel like there have been a lot of other systems that have done better ways of not only handling violence, but also just things like depictions of race or other species in fantasy, and just kind of being a little more aware from a world building perspective. But not only that too, even in terms of making stuff that I feel like is maybe a little bit lighter on the rules. I do feel like I feel like every now and again I'll meet people who are like, oh yeah, I love D&D, and then they proceed to list off like every single thing they hate about like 5e, and there are so many times where I've talked to people and it's like, what I think you really want is like a story game, or like something that's a little bit more on like the lighter rules, more RP side of things. And I feel like a lot of people just aren't aware that that scene exists or that those games are out there. And I think that's a shame. I think that when you really go out of your way to research and see the different types of experiences that you can get out of tabletop role-playing games, it'll just make you not only better as a like player or GM or whatever, but it'll just give you a broader appreciation of the medium and really see how flexible this concept, like this entire hobby, can be, really. And all of those different experiences are things that you can take and then add or keep in mind when you play other games. Like, I honestly feel like every single time I GM a different game or system, it makes me completely think about different possibilities for other games and stuff I want to run and how I want to handle things. Like, I'm playing I'm running a game of Fellowship 2nd Edition right now for some friends, and that's been going fantastically. And it's really made me think about the ways I want to handle ongoing threats to the world and kind of the race against the clock type elements that can sometimes fall by the wayside in traditional role-playing games. Like, it kind of has an integrated mechanic for that in Fellowship, and things like journey time and having to travel from one place to another and having to take time to rest and what's going on in the background while you're wasting that time. Just stuff like that made me think a lot about, how can I do this with other systems and stuff too, and make sure that that time component is something that the party needs to kind of keep aware of, or at the very least is something I can add that's interesting to the games I want to run. And just, in addition to that too, playing Blades in the Dark, I think also made me think a lot more about how I handle factions and differing groups, and kind of their wants and needs and the different tensions between them. In the settings that I want to run in and stuff like that too. It literally just every single time I run a different game, I feel like I'm learning lessons, and I feel like you just don't get that from just playing the same thing over and over and over again. So I guess my main takeaway is just know that there's a lot of different stuff out there that's very cool and well designed, and when you see people criticize D&D online, know that it comes a very real place of frustration, because it's just frankly very limiting, and there are so many wonderful creators out there in the tabletop scene that just aren't given the time of day because so many people just don't even care to look at their stuff, and I feel like that's such a shame. Check out some indie role-playing games, like just look through on itch.io is actually a great place to find indie role-playing games. You can look through DriveThruRPG, has just all sorts of stuff on there, from indie stuff to bigger, more mainstream stuff. But I really encourage you and your group of fellow players, or GM or whoever, challenge yourself to try something new. See if you like it. I think it is a good change. Is a good thing. Change is always a good experience that can help you just see things from a different perspective. And I really just encourage you to go out there and see what else awaits in the wonderful world of tabletop role-playing games, because God knows the world is just kind of boring if you're doing the same variations of the same thing over and over again, right? So video games are a more interesting place that things other than Dark Souls exist, as much as Dark Souls great, So yeah, that's all I really had to say, but I hope you got a lot out of this video, and let me know your thoughts down below. Have a good one. Bye.